Every city has a secret life, and London more than most.
There definitely was a vibe of Soho being where the homosexual world met with the theatre world, and most definitely with the underworld of prostitution, gambling, attractive gangsterism, and loads and loads and loads and loads of hookers on the streets. And I think the last of them are about to be legislated out of existence. All of these people mixed in certain places, mostly bars, the odd coffee house, and no more than the Salisbury were there any pubs that were obviously gay or exclusively gay. This was the first gay bar I ever walked into in my life, and gay bars were not visible, they were not advertised, everything closed at 10 at night, and you really did change back into a straight acting person the minute you walked out of that door, which had a very, very thick velvet curtain in front of it. And I don't know whether that was to keep the straight people out, the gay people in, the smoke, the cold, who knows? It felt symbolic. You slid in. And if you were scared enough, think about it, 1978, and plot that on your legalization of being gay and being out. Think of that on a timeline. A lot of us, and I guess I was one, would kind of go, and in we'd go, and the curtain would close. I can't even remember what we called ourselves, but the word queer hadn't even yet been fought for and reclaimed. So that's my earliest chapter of London.
There are other expressions which may puzzle viewers, so I should explain before we start that gay means homosexual.
The incarnation of Leicester Square in the late 70s was seedy. You could walk through it like a park. Rent boys again, bit rough. Everybody piled out the pubs at 10 o'clock at night, so there was that kind of weird time before Last Tube where there wasn't very much to do, but people were a bit pissed. So there's a kind of like various people whose agendas and stories and tribes would flow here, because you kind of wander to the place that looks like it's the middle of something or where something's happening. Adams had chintzy, pink, velour-covered tables with little individual table lamps with tiny little gold tassels all the way around. I remember it like yesterday. Menus, no bar that you could walk up to, you had to be served. It was another entire kind of thing. It was over the top and gold and pink and mirrors everywhere, so you couldn't hide. And you came in on the arm of an older man and sat there, and in my case somebody wanted to go on the stage, watch the cabaret, and I guess you paid for the experience by putting out later on and waking up somewhere like Hampstead instead of Clapham. This place then shut and then was replaced by an entirely new kind of club, and it was called the Subway. And it was the very first Amsterdam style, San Francisco style, overtly sexualised out gay bar in London. It was a members club with an even smaller people and nothing but black. And upstairs you could stand around, and by this time things were going on. We were getting more politicised, and our sexual politics was getting more confident, and it was in a window before the early 80s where the word AIDS began to be heard on the scene, and it was all up for grabs, and there was a brief complete free-for-all. And in that contest, for me, it started at the Subway. Downstairs was a dark room, and I'd never thought of such a thing. I couldn't believe it. You could just walk into this utterly dark room and shag who you wanted. You didn't need to waste any time buying them a drink or finding out their name. You didn't even need to know what they looked like. It was just an orgy, and it was in the basement, right under where I'm standing now. I loved it. I loved it for that little window, and then the world changed for us. This was the first street that became a queer street, all of it, in London. And it happened quite deliberately. It wasn't just the pink pound and people buying places and avoiding the rents and strategizing in that way. It happened because people wanted more than just a drinking hole, although perfectly friendly and perfectly nice as it was. It wasn't everything. This street I now love because it's got lovely cafes, it's got all kinds of places for queers and their friends and admirers. And one day before that sort of integration of this street into more or less a queer street, but with some lovely old Italian delis, Patisserie Valerie, the finest of old Soho, layered with the generosity that queerness brings to a public space. This street was deliberately claimed, and it was when the Gay Pride March was still allowed to come through the centre of London, and somebody from the more theatrical crowd around Derek decided that the march could have almost the feeling of an action, a non-violent action, a ceremony, a queered up, deliberate claiming of a space. And it was beautiful. It started in Soho Square, which is just one block north, and we went 3 times round Soho Square. And Derek was dressed as a Roman emperor with a big gold laurel wreath, and there were these gorgeous little muscle Marys dressed as cupids, and they were all sprayed gold. They were yummy looking, and they were on a float because he was quite ill. He wasn't walking, but he was on a throne, and he really was a hero to us at that point in, I guess I'm talking about the late 80s. And then it came down and it came along here, and Derek had a pile of City of Westminster street signs, and they said Queer Street, but they had the City of Westminster logo, and at each of the street signs that said Old Compton Street, one of these cupids would go shimmying up a ladder and replace the sign with Queer Street. And as an artist and as an activist and as a theatre worker, I believe that if you do a thing like that, you are actually changing your own history and you're sending a ripple forwards into the future. This place did become Queer Street. Not a ghetto, not exclusive, but there was a naming, there was an action, and it was witty and it was very queer, and it was also rather beautiful. I think there will always need to be gay spaces. I think there will always need to be women-only spaces. And every time we think, right, we've done it, we've integrated, right? We were, for example, as gay men, we were very separatist for a while, and then we opened the doors, and there were spaces in London that became more integrated and welcoming. We learned that from feminists who were separatists for a very long time and arguably always will need to be in some spaces, whether they're geographical or cultural or online spaces, but the doors also open and welcome people in. And feminists learned that from the civil rights movement in the States, where with absolutely no choice but to fight for basic spaces like a bus seat, that story of separation, integration, and maybe other kinds of redefining of your space have gone on. I think that the story of gay separate places and what the fight for them now offers to everybody is a bigger story about democracy and this being a safe country. And the more I travel around the world, the more I realise that London almost feels like a protected space. Most of it feels like that for me. That story's never going to end, but I think gay people have had quite a lot to bring to that story. Yeah. Whatever comes up in this street won't be affordable either to gay people wanting to open a cafe or Koreans wanting to serve nice noodles to students. Everybody loses in this picture. None of us have a voice in this picture. Don't want to sound depressing, but look at it. I bet what they built here is going to be crap.